In a quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled between rows of neatly trimmed lawns and colorful flower beds, stood an apartment complex with a sparkling community pool. It was one of those places where neighbors greeted each other warmly in the morning, and kids played tag until sunset. For Marcus Johnson, a hard-working black man who had recently moved into the building, this pool became his sanctuary after long days at work. He loved swimming laps to clear his mind or simply lounging on the edge with a good book. Life felt peaceful, until it wasn't. Marcus had always been someone who valued peace and quiet. At 32 years old, he worked as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company. His job required long hours staring at screens, solving problems, and meeting tight deadlines. By the time Friday rolled around, all he wanted was to relax somewhere calm. That's why he'd chosen this particular apartment complex when he relocated for his new position. The community pool was a major selling point, a perfect spot to unwind and recharge. Every Saturday morning, Marcus would wake up early, grab his towel, sunscreen, and headphones, and head down to the pool. He liked arriving before most people did because it gave him time to swim without interruptions. Sometimes he'd float on his back, staring at the blue sky above, letting go of all the stress that had built up during the week. Other times, he'd sit by the water's edge, sipping cold lemonade while flipping through pages of whatever novel he was reading at the moment. These small moments brought him immense joy. The other residents seemed friendly enough. There was Mr. Patel, an elderly man who often sat under the shade of a large umbrella, engrossed in crossword puzzles. Across from him was Mrs. Carter, a retired schoolteacher who spent her afternoons knitting brightly colored scarves. Even the children were well behaved, splashing around but never causing too much trouble. Everyone coexisted harmoniously, sharing the space without conflict. Or, so Marcus thought. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Marcus arrived at the pool earlier than usual. He carried his usual belongings, a beach towel, a bottle of water, and his favorite thriller novel, and settled into one of the lounge chairs near the shallow end. As he adjusted his sunglasses and opened his book, he noticed someone glaring at him from across the water. It was Karen Whitmore, a middle-aged white woman known for her loud complaints about everything from parking spots to recycling bins. She often walked around the complex like she owned the place, making snide remarks to anyone who crossed her path. Today, however, she seemed particularly agitated. Karen marched up to Marcus, hands on her hips. "Excuse me," she said sharply, drawing attention from nearby swimmers. Her voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation and splashing water. Marcus looked up, startled. "Yes," he replied politely, setting his book aside. "Are you aware that there's a rule against bringing outside chairs to the pool area?" Karen asked, pointing accusingly at the lounge chair Marcus was sitting on. Marcus blinked, confused. He glanced down at the chair and then back at Karen. "This is one of the communal chairs provided by the complex," he explained calmly. "I didn't bring it from home." Karen scoffed, clearly unimpressed by his explanation. "Well, maybe you should double-check next time," she snapped before storming off toward the deep end of the pool. Marcus stared after her, dumbfounded. He turned to look at the other residents nearby, hoping for some kind of confirmation that he hadn't done anything wrong. But they avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice the awkward exchange. Feeling uneasy, Marcus picked up his book again, though his focus was now shattered. Who was this woman, and why was she picking a fight over something so trivial? The next hour, Marcus tried to shake off the encounter. He reminded himself that Karen was probably just having a bad day. Maybe she was stressed about something unrelated and took it out on him. Still, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in. Something about the way she spoke to him, the tone of her voice, the dismissive wave of her hand, left a sour taste in his mouth. It wasn't just rude, it felt calculated, almost intentional. As the afternoon wore on, more families began arriving at the pool. Children laughed and shrieked as they jumped into the water, their parents chatting idly. Nearby, Marcus watched them, trying to distract himself from thoughts of Karen. But every time he glanced toward the deep end, he saw her watching him. Her gaze was piercing, accusatory, as if she were waiting for him to slip up again. By the time Marcus packed up his things and headed back to his apartment, he felt drained, not physically but emotionally. What should have been a relaxing day at the pool had turned into an unsettling experience. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't going to let this go anytime soon, and Marcus would soon realize that dealing with her wouldn't be as simple as ignoring her comments or brushing off her accusations. For now, though, Marcus decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it really was just a misunderstanding. Maybe tomorrow would be better. But deep down, a small part of him suspected otherwise. After all, some storms don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning. They creep in quietly, unnoticed, until it's too late to escape. The following Saturday, Marcus returned to the pool hoping for a peaceful day. He had deliberately chosen a different chair this time, one closer to Mr. Patel and farther away from where Karen had been sitting the previous week. Surely, he thought, she wouldn't bother him again if he stayed out of her way. But as Marcus settled in with his book, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with tension he couldn't quite explain. It didn't take long for Karen to make her presence known. Within minutes of Marcus arriving, she appeared at the pool's edge, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a clipboard. Her posture was stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. Without saying a word, she began pacing back and forth along the perimeter of the pool, inspecting every detail as though she were conducting an audit. When her eyes landed on Marcus, they narrowed slightly, and she adjusted her grip on the clipboard. Marcus tried to ignore her. He told himself she wasn't worth his energy, but it was hard to focus when he could feel her gaze boring into him. Eventually she approached, stopping just a few feet away. "Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the lazy hum of conversation around them. Marcus sighed inwardly before looking up. "Yes?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I've noticed you tend to play your music pretty loudly," Karen said, tilting her head toward the small Bluetooth speaker resting on the ground beside him. "There's a rule about excessive noise disturbing other residents." Marcus blinked, surprised. His music wasn't loud. It was barely audible over the chatter and splashing of children nearby. Still, he reached down and turned the volume down even lower. "I'm sorry if it bothered anyone," he replied politely. "But I don't think anyone else has complained." Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Well, maybe they're too polite to say anything," she shot back, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Then, without waiting for a response, she spun on her heel and walked away, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. The encounter left Marcus frustrated but determined not to let it ruin his day. He reminded himself that Karen was likely just being difficult for no real reason. People like her thrived on drama, feeding off the reactions they provoked in others. If he ignored her, maybe she'd lose interest and move on to someone else. But Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, her behavior escalated dramatically. Every time Marcus visited the pool, she found something new to criticize. One afternoon, it was the fact that he'd briefly rested his feet on the edge of the pool while sitting on a lounge chair. Another day, it was the claim that his towel was taking up too much space on the shared seating area. Each interaction grew more absurd than the last, yet Karen delivered each accusation with the same air of authority, as if she were the self-appointed guardian of pool etiquette. What made matters worse was how personal her comments became. At first, her criticisms had focused on minor infractions, things any reasonable person would overlook. But soon, her remarks veered into racially charged territory. During one particularly heated exchange, Karen muttered, "People like you always think they can do whatever they want." Marcus froze, stunned by the implication behind her words. Did she mean people who looked like him? Was this really about pool rules? Or was it something deeper? Despite his growing anger, Marcus chose not to confront her directly. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him upset. Instead, he tried to document her behavior, whenever possible, snapping discreet photos of her glaring at him or scribbling notes on her clipboard. He hoped that having evidence might come in handy later, if things got worse. Unfortunately, they did get worse. Karen began involving other residents in her crusade against Marcus. She started showing them photos she'd taken of him at the pool, pointing out supposed violations and whispering conspiratorially about how he was disrespecting the community. Some neighbors rolled their eyes at her antics, dismissing her as overly dramatic. Others, however, started giving Marcus wary looks as if unsure whether to trust him. The once friendly atmosphere at the pool began to shift, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that lingered even after Karen left. One evening, as Marcus relaxed in the hot tub after a long day, Karen struck again. This time, she brought reinforcements, a printed copy of the pool rules and a smug expression that suggested she'd finally caught him red-handed. "See here," she said, jabbing at a random line on the paper. "No food or drinks allowed." Marcus frowned, glancing at the empty cup sitting beside him. "That's my water bottle," he explained patiently, "and I haven't eaten anything today." Karen huffed, clearly irritated that her accusation wasn't sticking. But instead of backing down, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're lucky I don't call management right now." For a moment, Marcus considered arguing further. He wanted to point out how ridiculous her claims were, how unfair it was that she singled him out while ignoring similar actions by others. But then he stopped himself. Arguing with Karen would only fuel her fire. She thrived on conflict. The angrier she made him, the more power she gained. No, Marcus realized, there had to be another way to deal with her. That night, as he lay in bed replaying the day's events in his mind, Marcus came to a decision. He couldn't keep ignoring Karen's harassment. It was affecting not only his peace of mind but also the overall vibe at the pool. Something had to change. And if Karen refused to back down, then maybe it was time for him to fight back. But on his own terms. The idea came to him suddenly, fully formed and surprisingly simple. What if he could turn the tables on Karen? What if he could expose her true nature to everyone else in the complex, proving once and for all that her complaints were baseless and rooted in prejudice? It wouldn't be easy. But Marcus knew he wasn't alone. Other residents had already expressed frustration with Karen's behavior. Maybe, just maybe, they'd be willing to help him stand up to her. With renewed determination, Marcus began reaching out to his neighbors. He started small, casually mentioning his run-ins with Karen during conversations at the mailboxes or in the elevator. To his relief, many of them nodded knowingly. One elderly couple recounted how Karen had accused them of hogging the grill during a family barbecue. A young mother described being reprimanded for letting her toddler splash too loudly. Slowly, but surely, Marcus built a network of allies who were tired of Karen's constant drama. Encouraged by their support, Marcus devised a plan. With the help of his tech-savvy friend Jamal, who lived in the same complex, they installed hidden cameras around the pool area. The goal was to capture Karen's interactions with residents, documenting her rude comments, exaggerated complaints, and outright lies. Armed with this evidence, Marcus felt confident they could finally hold her accountable. But Marcus also wanted to teach Karen a lesson she wouldn't forget. He decided to stage a clever prank involving fake management notices and a staged inspection. Using official-looking documents, they warned residents about stricter enforcement of pool rules and hinted that violators would face fines. The plan was simple. Make Karen believe she was under scrutiny, then watch her unravel. As Marcus finalized the details of his plan, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was uncharted territory for him. He wasn't used to confronting problems head-on, but deep down he knew it was necessary. Karen's behavior wasn't just annoying, it was toxic. And if no one else was willing to stand up to her, then it was up to Marcus to show her that her reign of terror was over. Little did Marcus know, the best was yet to come. Marcus's mind was racing as he sat in his apartment late one evening, sketching out the details of his plan. He knew he couldn't take Karen on directly. She thrived on confrontation, and any argument would only give her more ammunition to use against him. No, this had to be smarter, subtler. It needed to expose her for who she really was without giving her a chance to twist the narrative in her favor. With Jamal's help, Marcus was confident they could pull it off. Jamal lived 2 floors above Marcus and was known around the complex as the Tech Whiz. Whether it was fixing someone's Wi-Fi router or setting up smart home devices, Jamal always seemed to have a solution for every problem. When Marcus approached him with his idea, Jamal listened intently, nodding along as Marcus explained Karen's behavior and how it had affected not just him, but other residents too. "This woman is out of control," Jamal said finally, shaking his head. "She needs to be stopped." "I agree," Marcus replied, leaning forward. "But I don't want to stoop to her level. I want to show everyone what she's really like, without making it personal." Jamal grinned, his eyes lighting up. "Leave it to me. We'll make her look like the villain she is." The first step of their plan involved gathering evidence. Jamal suggested installing discrete cameras around the pool area to record Karen's interactions with residents. These cameras would capture everything: her sharp comments, her exaggerated complaints, and even her attempts to recruit others to her side. The footage would serve as undeniable proof of her toxic behavior. Over the next few days, Jamal worked his magic, using tiny battery-powered cameras disguised as ordinary objects, a fake potted plant here, a decorative rock there. He set up a network of hidden recording devices around the pool. Each camera was strategically placed to cover key areas where Karen frequently patrolled. By the time they were done, the entire pool area was under surveillance. While Jamal handled the technical side of things, Marcus focused on building alliances. He continued reaching out to his neighbors, sharing his experiences and asking if anyone else had been targeted by Karen. To his surprise, more people came forward than he expected. Some had endured similar treatment. Others had simply grown, tired of her constant complaining. Together, they formed a loose coalition united by a shared goal: putting an end to Karen's reign of terror. With both the evidence and support in place, Marcus turned his attention to the final piece of the puzzle: the prank. This part of the plan was designed to push Karen over the edge, forcing her to reveal her true colors in front of everyone. Jamal helped create official-looking documents warning residents about stricter enforcement of pool rules, printed on crisp white paper with the complex's logo prominently displayed. These notices looked authentic enough to fool even the most skeptical resident. The notices stated that management would soon begin conducting inspections to ensure compliance with all regulations. Violators, it warned, would face hefty fines. While the documents were completely fake, they served their purpose, creating a sense of urgency and paranoia among the residents, especially Karen. On a bright Sunday morning, Marcus and Jamal posted the notices in prominent locations around the pool area. They made sure Karen saw them first. True to form, she immediately sprang into action. Clutching her clipboard, she began interrogating other residents, demanding to know if they'd received any warnings. Her questions grew increasingly frantic as she realized she might be in trouble. "Did you get one of these?" she asked Mr. Patel, thrusting the notice in his face. "What does it mean, strict enforcement? Are they going to fine us?" Mr. Patel shrugged, clearly unbothered. "I don't know. I haven't done anything wrong." Karen scowled and moved on to the next person, but no matter whom she questioned, the answers were always the same: shrugs, confused looks, or outright indifference. Frustrated, she retreated to a corner of the pool area, muttering to herself and scribbling notes furiously on her clipboard. Meanwhile, Marcus watched from a distance, recording everything on his phone. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as he observed Karen spiraling into panic. For weeks, she had made life miserable for him and others. Now, it was her turn to feel the weight of scrutiny. To add another layer of drama, Marcus and Jamal arranged for 2 actors to pose as inspectors. Dressed in suits and carrying clipboards, the men arrived at the pool later that afternoon, drawing immediate attention from the residents. Karen spotted them instantly and rushed over, eager to present her case. "Excuse me," she called out, waving her folder in the air. "I'm glad you're finally addressing this issue. There's a man here, Marcus Johnson, who has been breaking the rules for weeks." The actors exchanged glances, pretending to be intrigued. One of them gestured for Karen to explain further. Tell us more, he said calmly. Karen launched into a detailed account of Marcus's supposed violations, citing specific incidents and referencing photos she'd taken as evidence. As she spoke, her voice grew louder and more agitated, drawing curious stares from nearby residents. Some openly laughed at her theatrics, while others rolled their eyes and returned to their conversations. When Karen finished, the actors nodded thoughtfully. Then, one of them leaned closer, his expression serious. "And why exactly are you monitoring Mr. Johnson so closely?" he asked. "Do you work for management?" Karen faltered, caught off guard by the question. "No, but because we've received multiple reports about your behavior," the second actor interrupted smoothly. "Residents say you've been harassing them, making baseless accusations and disrupting the peace. Care to comment on that?" Karen's face turned red, her hands trembling as she clutched her folder. "That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "I'm just trying to enforce the rules." The actors exchanged another glance, this time with raised eyebrows. "We'll need to look into this further," one of them said, turning away dismissively. "Thank you for bringing it to our attention." Humiliated, Karen stormed off, vowing revenge under her breath. But by then it was too late. Dozens of residents had witnessed the entire exchange, including many who had previously doubted Marcus's claims. The tide had shifted decisively, against Karen. As the actors packed up and left, Marcus approached Jamal with a grin. "Phase 1 complete," he said quietly. "Now let's see how long it takes her to realize none of this was real." Jamal chuckled, shaking his head. "She's going to lose it when she finds out, but honestly, she deserves it." Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of triumph and relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt hopeful. Karen's power rested entirely on fear and intimidation. Once people saw through her facade, her influence would crumble. And thanks to their plan, that moment was fast approaching. But Marcus also knew this wasn't just about Karen. It was about sending a message. People like her thrived because others stayed silent, afraid to challenge them. By standing up to her, Marcus hoped to inspire others to do the same, not just in the apartment complex, but wherever they encountered such behavior. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden rays across the pool, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over yet, but the war was already won. The next morning, the atmosphere at the apartment complex was electric. Word of Karen's public humiliation had spread like wildfire. By the time Marcus arrived at the pool for his usual Saturday routine, clusters of residents were already gathered, whispering and laughing about what had happened the day before. Some openly imitated Karen's dramatic gestures, while others joked about the inspectors who had called her out. For the first time in weeks, the pool area felt alive, not with tension, but with camaraderie. Karen, however, was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't shown up at the pool that morning, which wasn't surprising given how thoroughly she'd been exposed. But Marcus knew better than to think it was over. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. She would want revenge. Still, for now there was a sense of relief in the air, a collective exhale from everyone who had endured her antics for far too long. As Marcus settled into a lounge chair near the shallow end, he couldn't help but smile. The prank had worked even better than he'd anticipated. The fake notices and staged inspection had pushed Karen into revealing her true nature. Her frantic attempts to defend herself only highlighted how petty and vindictive she really was. And the best part? Everyone else finally saw it too. But just as Marcus began to relax, the sound of heels clicking against concrete echoed across the pool deck. Heads turned as Karen appeared, her face pale but determined. She wore her signature, oversized sunglasses, though they did little to hide the dark circles under her eyes. In one hand, she clutched her trusty clipboard. In the other, she held a stack of papers that looked suspiciously like the fake notices Marcus and Jamal had posted. Without hesitation, Karen marched straight toward the center of the pool area, where several families were lounging. "Listen, up," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I need to address this ridiculous situation once and for all." The residents exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or brace themselves for another tirade. Marcus leaned back, in his chair, watching silently as Karen positioned herself in front of the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised them to silence the murmurs around her. "This so-called inspection yesterday?" Karen began, her tone dripping with disdain. "It was a setup, a trick. Someone deliberately tried to embarrass me, and I know exactly who's behind it." She pointed a finger directly at Marcus, her accusing gaze locking onto him. "You." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he stood slowly, meeting her stare with calm indifference. "Is there something you'd like to say to me, Karen?" he asked evenly, his voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. Karen hesitated for a split second before launching into a tirade. "Don't act innocent. You've been targeting me ever since you moved in here. First, you break the rules left and right, and now you're trying to turn everyone against me. Well, let me tell you something." "Hold on," Marcus interrupted, raising a hand to stop her. "Let's not forget why we're even having this conversation. You've spent weeks harassing me, and plenty of other people, for no reason. All because you don't like sharing the pool with someone who doesn't look like you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several residents nodded in agreement, their expressions growing increasingly hostile toward Karen. Even Mrs. Carter, the retired school teacher, spoke up. "He's right, Karen. We've all seen how you treat people. It's not fair." Karen's jaw dropped. Clearly, she hadn't expected anyone to challenge her publicly. "That's not true," she protested, her voice rising an octave. "I'm just trying to enforce the rules. Someone has to." "No, Karen," Mr. Patel chimed in, pushing his crossword puzzle aside. "You're not enforcing anything. You're bullying people, and frankly, it's getting old." For a moment, Karen seemed speechless. Her eyes darted around the pool area, searching for support, but finding none. The same neighbors who had once tolerated her complaints now stared at her coldly, their patience worn thin. Even the children playing nearby had stopped splashing to watch the spectacle unfold. Seizing the opportunity, Marcus stepped closer to Karen. "Here's the thing," he said firmly. "If you really cared about the rules, you wouldn't single out certain people while ignoring everyone else. You wouldn't stalk us with your clipboard or take photos like some kind of amateur detective. And you definitely wouldn't try to pit us against each other." Karen sputtered, clearly struggling to come up with a response. I was just doing my job," she stammered finally, though her argument sounded weak even to her own ears. "That's not your job," Marcus countered. "Your job is to live peacefully with your neighbors, not terrorize them. If you can't do that, maybe it's time to reconsider where you belong." The words hit their mark. Karen's face flushed red, and for a brief moment it looked like she might cry. But instead of backing down, she squared her shoulders and glared at Marcus. "Fine," she spat. "Have it your way, but don't think this is over." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, leaving behind a stunned silence. The residents exchanged glances, unsure whether to cheer or simply breathe a sigh of relief. Marcus returned to his chair, feeling a mix of triumph and exhaustion. He had stood his ground, and the community had rallied behind him. But the victory wasn't without its cost. It had taken weeks of stress and effort to get here. Over the next few days, life at the apartment complex began to return to normal. Residents resumed their usual routines, chatting amiably by the pool and enjoying the sunshine. Karen, however, kept a low profile. She avoided the pool entirely, retreating into isolation within her apartment. Occasionally, she could be seen peeking out from her balcony, watching silently as laughter echoed below. But no one paid her much attention anymore. Behind the scenes, Marcus and Jamal reviewed the footage captured by the hidden cameras. They had hours of recordings documenting Karen's behavior, from her sharp comments to her exaggerated complaints. While they debated whether to share the evidence with management, they ultimately decided against it. The prank had already achieved its purpose, exposing Karen's true nature and uniting the residents against her. Taking things further might only prolong the drama, and Marcus didn't want to dwell on negativity any longer. Instead, he focused on rebuilding the sense of community that Karen had nearly destroyed. He organized a casual barbecue by the pool one weekend, inviting everyone to come together and celebrate their newfound solidarity. To his delight, Nearly every resident attended, bringing dishes to share and stories to tell. For the first time, in months, the atmosphere felt genuinely warm and welcoming. As the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the pool area, Marcus found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. Standing up to Karen hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Not only had he reclaimed his peace of mind, but he had also inspired others to speak out against injustice. In doing so, he had created a space where everyone felt valued and respected. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't entirely over. People, like Karen, existed everywhere, in workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and they thrived on silence. By challenging her, Marcus hoped to send a message that prejudice and entitlement had no place in a community built on mutual respect. And if others took that lesson to heart, then perhaps the world could become a little brighter, one neighborhood at a time. As he packed up his things and headed back to his apartment, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The battle may have been won, but the war for equality and fairness was far from finished, and he was ready to keep fighting. The weeks that followed Karen's public meltdown marked a turning point for the apartment complex. Life at the pool returned to its usual rhythm, but with one significant difference. Karen's influence had all but disappeared. She stopped showing up at the pool altogether, retreating into her apartment like a shadow hiding from the light. Occasionally, residents would catch glimpses of her peeking through her curtains or walking briskly to her car, avoiding eye contact with anyone who crossed her path. It was as if she had become a ghost haunting the edges of their lives, a reminder of what they had endured but no longer feared. For Marcus, the change was profound. The weight of Karen's harassment had lifted, leaving him free to enjoy the peace and quiet he had sought when he first moved in. He returned to his routine of swimming laps in the morning or lounging by the water with a good book. But something else had shifted too. His relationships with his neighbors had deepened. What started as a shared frustration with Karen had blossomed into genuine friendships. Conversations flowed more easily now. Laughter rang out more often, and the sense of community grew stronger than ever before. One evening, as Marcus sat on the edge of the pool watching the sunset, Mrs. Carter approached him with a warm smile. "You know," she said, settling onto the lounge chair beside him, "I don't think we've ever properly thanked you." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thanked me? For what?" "For standing up to Karen," she replied simply. "None of us wanted to deal with her nonsense, but you did. You took the risk, and because of that, we're all better off." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to being praised for speaking up. Growing up, he'd learned to keep his head down and avoid trouble whenever possible. But this time, staying silent hadn't been an option, not when Karen's behavior threatened to poison the entire neighborhood. "It wasn't just me," he said finally. "Everyone played a part. If people hadn't supported me, I wouldn't have gotten very far." Mrs. Carter nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe so. But it takes courage to take the first step. And you did that." Her words stayed with Marcus long after their conversation ended. They reminded him of something important, that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning battles. It's about creating ripples of change that can inspire others to do the same. By challenging Karen, he hadn't just reclaimed his own dignity. He had empowered those around him to demand respect and fairness too. As summer gave way to fall, the apartment complex transformed into a place where kindness and inclusivity reigned supreme. Neighbors organized regular gatherings, from potluck dinners to movie nights under the stars. Children raced each other across the lawn while parents exchanged recipes and gardening tips. Even Mr. Patel, who had once kept to himself, could often be found teaching eager kids how to solve crossword puzzles. Karen's absence didn't go unnoticed, but it also didn't leave a void. Instead, her departure created space for something new to grow, a culture of mutual respect and understanding. Residents made a conscious effort to include everyone, regardless of age, race, or background. When disagreements arose, and they occasionally did, they were resolved through open dialogue rather than accusations or drama, Still, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the broader implications of what had happened. Karen's actions hadn't been isolated incidents. They were symptomatic of deeper issues rooted in prejudice and entitlement. Her obsession with enforcing rules had masked a deeper discomfort with diversity, a fear of sharing spaces with people who didn't look or act like her. While her behavior had been extreme, it wasn't entirely unique. Across the country, similar conflicts played out daily, fueled by ignorance and intolerance. This realization inspired Marcus to take action beyond the confines of the apartment complex. He began volunteering with local organizations focused on promoting racial equity and social justice. Whether it was mentoring young students, participating in community forums, or organizing workshops on bystander intervention, Marcus threw himself into efforts aimed at fostering empathy and inclusion. His experiences with Karen had taught him that change didn't happen overnight, but it was always worth pursuing. One Saturday afternoon, as Marcus prepared to lead a discussion at a nearby community center, Jamal joined him with a grin. "So what's next for you, hero?" he teased, punching Marcus lightly on the shoulder. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero. Just someone trying to make things better, for myself and for others." Jamal's expression softened. "Well, whatever you call it, you're making a difference, and honestly, that's pretty heroic." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several participants, eager to dive into the day's topic, addressing microaggressions in everyday life. As Marcus stepped up to the podium, he felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. This was uncharted territory for him, but he welcomed the challenge. After all, if he could stand up to Karen, he could certainly tackle bigger issues. Back at Aoi, the apartment complex, life continued to flourish. The pool remained a popular spot, even as the weather cooled and leaves turned golden. Residents decorated the area with string lights and cozy blankets, turning it into a year-round gathering place. On weekends, families gathered around portable heaters, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories late into the night. Karen eventually moved out, citing unspecified, personal reasons. No one asked questions or expressed regret about her departure. In her place came a young couple with a toddler, whose cheerful energy brought even more warmth to the community. They quickly became friends with everyone, including Marcus, who introduced them to the joys of poolside barbecues and impromptu game nights. As winter approached, Marcus stood by the pool one last time before closing it for the season. Wrapping his scarf tighter against the chill, he gazed out at the empty chairs and calm water. So much had changed since he first arrived, all because he had refused to let Karen dictate his life. He had faced adversity head-on, not with anger or hatred, but with creativity, patience, and resilience. And in doing so, he had transformed not only his own world, but the worlds of those around him. Marcus knew challenges lay ahead. Prejudice and inequality wouldn't disappear overnight, and there would always be people like Karen, those who clung to power and privilege at the expense of others. But he also knew that every small victory mattered. Every act of resistance, every moment of solidarity, brought them closer to a brighter future. With a final glance at the pool, Marcus turned and headed back toward his apartment. As he walked, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for his neighbors, for his friends, and for the strength he had discovered within himself. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Together, they could build a world where everyone belonged. And that, Marcus thought with a satisfied smile, was worth every moment of effort.